A city awakens, veiled by a mist that barely conceals the traces of a terrible past. We are in Japan, at the gates of the city whose name is emblazoned on the nation's history. Somewhere in the heart of the metropolis, two women stand in contemplation. As strange as it may seem, what stands before them is neither a divinity nor an idol, but a tree, a majestic giant standing motionless at the heart of the Husembu Temple. This tree is so honored, so adored, so revered, that one might think a deity had manifested itself in plant form. Between this city and this tree, a bond exists, which was formed on the day when time suddenly froze. We are in Hiroshima, where on August 6th, 1945, the apocalypse swept over the city. All living beings made of cells and flesh were consumed from within, and nothing remained of the city except rubble and ruins. Days after the catastrophe, a few men and women like Nobuko Terao wandered through this devastated land.
The day after the explosion, I went to Hiroshima. At the site of the temple that belonged to my family, nothing remained except rubble. Everything had collapsed. But amid the debris, a large tree remained standing. Thanks to the tree, I was able to find my way around the ruins. The part of the trunk that had been exposed to the radiation was burnt to ashes, and there was not a single leaf, whereas at that time of the year it should have been covered in leaves. I was sure the tree was dead.
A few weeks after Japan's surrender, delegations of American experts arrived at the archipelago. Their opinion was conclusive. Nothing could ever survive again on the irradiated, contaminated ground.
After a while, new buds appeared on the tree, which gave me courage and brought me great comfort.
Despite all the predictions, a miracle occurred. The dead trunk sprouted leaves. As incredible as it seems, the tree, a Ginkgo biloba, survived the catastrophe. For Shuko Takashi, Nobuko Terao's niece, the tree that survived is absolutely invaluable.
The bomb had completely destroyed the buildings and our temple. Members of our family died. At that time, my father was in China. When he returned, a year after the disaster, nothing remained except for the Ginkgo biloba planted when he was born. That gave him hope. The tree had been planted in honor of his birth. They had grown up and lived together.
Is it really possible that a living organism can resist a flood of radiation? How could the Ginkgo of Hiroshima have survived? Does it belong to a species endowed with unlimited resistance, or does it owe its destiny to a kind of miracle, or just good fortune? Our investigation begins here, in the very heart of the martyred city. Of the ancient city, only this dome remains, a steel ghost that marks the entrance to the Peace Memorial Museum. There, in the museum archives, Akuro Horikushi attempts to determine what the trees experienced at the time of the explosion.
50% of the trees had been knocked down by the blast. They were all charred, irradiated. Of course, the damage got worse as one approached the epicenter of the explosion. The atomic detonation occurred in August. In September, Typhoon Muroto hit. Then suddenly the crabgrasses started growing.
Among the few plants that were growing not far from the epicenter, 7 ginkgos had survived.
The first one at Hasembu, 1.1 kilometers away from the epicenter, and another one at Shuken, 1.3 kilometers away.
Akuro Horikoshi has taken care of most of the miracle ginkgos of Hiroshima. Here, he's called the plant doctor. In Shuken Garden, he saved a ginkgo that seemed about to collapse.
In 1945, this tree was blasted and irradiated by the atomic bomb. It started to fall over. You see that it's still leaning. We had to prop it up. Most of the trees of the garden died, but this one survived the explosion. Despite everything that happened to it, it continues to bear fruit.
It is certain that for the residents of Hiroshima, the ginkgo's resilience symbolizes hope, courage, and the determination to live. The plant doctor continues his rounds at the Arankoji Temple, situated less than 3,000 meters from the epicenter of the blast. When it was necessary to rebuild the entrance to the temple, the architect decided to remove the tree, which limited his creativity. But the monks worshipped the tree as a sacred object. The artist had to build the structure around the ginkgo, rather than in its place. For Akuro Horikoshi, as well as for Koji Toyuka, superior monk of Arankuji, the moment is solemn. This metal medallion placed on the trunk will indicate to visitors that despite appearances, life never completely abandoned Hiroshima. A living organism capable of resisting a nuclear explosion has to be invincible, immovable, indestructible. And if that is so, the secret of the ginkgo would be invaluable. In 1932, long before the others, the Japanese chemist Furukawa suspected so. He was the first to use scientific methods to study the unsuspected properties of the ginkgo. But the molecules that must be isolated are so complex that it will take many decades to adequately develop the research, mostly in French and German pharmaceutical laboratories. For pharmacologist François Clostre, the Ginkgo biloba is a new star in scientific research.
We have suspected for a long time that the Ginkgo biloba could make a stellar entrance on the therapeutic scene and could open up new areas of research as much for chemists as for pharmacologists.
Actually, the ginkgo's reputation for invulnerability precedes Hiroshima. Still today, many beliefs and superstitions indicate that people noted its exceptional strength a long time ago. Futaro Mitsuhori, former professor at Tsukuba University, the Ginkgo biloba is an organism set apart from the rest. His wife points out that even the leaves are fire-resistant.
Ginkgo leaves cannot be burned easily. It means we can believe ginkgo trees protect from fire or other disasters, like thunder, lightning. Even now, Japanese people think Ginkgo biloba, ginkgo trees can protect buildings or tree itself.
In China and Japan, ginkgos have been planted to protect the temples. They thought that the tree's invulnerability would probably extend to the surrounding areas and even to nearby objects.
Originally, when the priests walked around local temples or local area, they used ginkgo branch as cane or sticks, and then when they rested at some temples, they planted. They just put it on the ground, and then it's rooted.
At the foot of the great staircase of the Kamakura Temple stands one of these legendary giants. A sheminawa, a rope made of rice straw, is tied around the trunk and indicates that the tree is sacred. Twice every month, a ritual is dedicated to this 700-year-old elder. Small white pieces of paper called gohei are added to the rope. They drive away bad spirits. Bring luck to the capital and add to its beauty. Over 65,000 ginkgos have been planted in the streets and parks of Tokyo. And according to tradition, the Ginkgo biloba leaf is associated with one of the rituals that is closest to the hearts of the Japanese. Here, at the end of an unnamed street, the ginkgo leaf has a central place in another sanctuary, that of the living gods, the sumo wrestlers. Since the 18th century, they have adopted the hairstyle called o-iko, or Great Ginkgo. Today, Kunio Watanabe, official hairstylist of the sumo wrestlers, repeats the meticulous gestures of his ancestors. The entire mass of hair is tied in a crown, then smoothed and fashioned into the shape of a large ginkgo leaf. This style, which only the best fighters are allowed to wear, also cushions the blows to the head. But the sumo wrestlers hope most of all that the ginkgo will transmit a part of its invincible strength to their bodies and spirits. Indeed, all the popular beliefs attribute exceptional powers to the sacred tree, a possible indicator that the ginkgos of Hiroshima did not experience a miracle, but that their powers come from the very properties of the species. However, such resistance is so astonishing that one might doubt the popular wisdom. For example, the ginkgo was admired for its sexuality, which was thought of as almost human due to the pendants on its branches called chichis. For some, they evoke the testicles of the males. For others, mammary protrusions that resembled women's breasts. It was thought that this similarity between the tree and humans was proof of its extraordinary superiority.
The ginkgo's method of fertilization is comparable to that of humans and animals. There is sperm and the ovum. The sperm swim toward the ovum. Thus, the process of fertilization is the same as for animals.
In this system, if the male trees are far from female trees, the opportunities for reproduction are reduced. Therefore, contrary to legend, the ginkgo's sexuality is primitive and represents more of an inconvenience than an evolutionary advantage for the species. Let's take this further. Must we trust the same superstitions that claim the invulnerability of ginkgo? Actually, the species range has regressed over the ages. particularly toward the end of the Cretaceous period 65 million years ago. Earthquakes and the planet's successive periods of warming and glaciation have caused the demise of numerous ginkgos. Kazuhiko Iomura, director of the Paleobotany Department at the National Science Museum in Tokyo, has studied the course of this extinction.
We have found ginkgo fossils that are 270 million years old. We therefore know that the oldest ancestors of the ginkgo lived in the Paleozoic period. The ginkgos then spread all over the world. But 65 million years ago, in the second part of the Cenozoic, climatic changes weakened the species.
Fossilized leaves prove that several species of ginkgo existed, some of which lived 300 million years ago. All these species have disappeared. Meanwhile, it is known that a residual population managed to survive deep in a lost valley in China. Terumitsu Hori claims that a ginkgo that does not suffer a sudden death can live indefinitely. He is seeking to understand how these trees, which survived the earthquakes of the Cretaceous period in China, have mysteriously reappeared in Japan. To this end, he has cataloged the oldest specimens in the archipelago and determined their age.
I believe the oldest ginkgo in Japan is about 700 years old. Many people think the ginkgo was introduced in Japan at the same time as Buddhism. But nothing and no one has proven this hypothesis. According to my research, the introduction of ginkgo has no correlation with Buddhism. The Buddhist religion came to Japan around the 6th century, while the ginkgo arrived much later, around the 13th century.
Terumitsu Hori's research may prove that no ginkgo has ever succumbed to degeneration in Japan, and, as it were, none has ever died of old age.
Considering the nature of this region's soil and climate, I think that this tree has grown relatively rapidly. My measurements indicate that its circumference is 4.6 meters.
To determine the age of a tree, Terumitsu Hori first examines the quality of the soil and the exposure of the tree. For if the conditions are good, the tree will grow rapidly and will take on the deceptive appearance of a very old tree. To verify its age, he will take a core sampling by drilling the trunk with a hollow gimlet. This technique poses no danger to the tree. A tube introduced into the gimlet allows him to remove a sample of the trunk. This fragile rod will be glued onto a base. Finally, Hori calculates the age of the tree using the diameter of the trunk, the length of the sample, and the number of ridges found on it.
Thus, based on my quick assessment, this tree must be between 230 and 240 years old. I had imagined it to be a little bit younger.
Therefore, this tree is not the oldest in Japan. But Hori has proven that some Ginkgo biloba in the archipelago are 700 years old. This means that the trees born in Japan have never died of old age, because they were introduced in the 13th century. Could the ginkgo be the exception to the rule that anything that lives advances towards its own destruction? Normally, living organisms are subject to an unavoidable phenomenon called entropy. Anything that is organized becomes disorganized, and consequently, anything that lives dies. In the universe, matter inevitably evolves towards a state of growing disorder until it reaches a state of chaos. Of course, the longevity of living organisms may vary. Some, such as the mayfly or various insects, live for only a few hours or a few days. Others, mammals for example, can live up to 59 years, or 70 to 80 years in the case of elephants. If these young crocodiles reach adulthood, they could live an average of 70 years. In the case of vertebrates, the record for longevity is held by the turtle, who can live up to 200 years. But everyone, including humans, is subject to the phenomenon of unavoidable degeneration. Short or long, lifespans are always limited. In Japan, there are no ginkgos old enough to show signs of degeneration. The search must therefore continue elsewhere. We must now go to Tianmushan in the Zhejiang province of China, where a fossilized tree survived the Cretaceous earthquakes to search for ancient ginkgos. If these trees that have resisted the passage of time really exist, in what state will we find them? Will they be weakened and dilapidated, proving that nothing can escape entropy? Or proud and strong, proving that they have defeated the universal law? Lin Xie, a biology professor at Shanghai University, has long since studied the question. Like Tero Mitsuhori in Japan, he has sought China's oldest ginkgos. Specimens that are thousands of years old can be found here. Lee knows that in these huge forests, Ginkgo bilobas several thousand years old can be found. Descendants of a species that saw 70% of sea organisms and most of the land animals and plants around them become extinct. To find the oldest ginkgos, Lin Xie will guide us to the heart of this ancient forest. Before penetrating the thick foliage, Lin arranged to follow a path that leads to a veritable site of pilgrimage for the Chinese. On an escarpment, suspended in the air, we find the tree called the Flying Dragon. At more than 2,000 years old, this ginkgo pushes the known age limits of the species.
The longevity of the ginkgo is incredible. Some in China are over 3,000 years old. And both in the north and the south, ginkgos thousands of years old are not difficult to find. This ginkgo is also called 5 generations under the same roof. It is a veritable treasure for our heritage. The ginkgo is different from other trees in that it can reproduce not only from seed, but also by budding from the root. Thus, a perpetual transfer from generation to generation is ensured.
The tree is therefore endowed with an unsurpassed capacity to regenerate, The original trunk may be damaged or destroyed by lightning, for example, but it will not die, because almost immediately, young buds will sprout again from the roots. To better illustrate this discovery, Lean looks for a specimen similar to the flying dragon, a tree he identified a few years ago and named Several Generations Under the Same Roof. Such trees seem to defy the laws of nature. When, for example, the flying dragon's trunk disintegrated 1,000 years ago, the tree immediately generated 22 new trunks, which grew from the same roots as the old trunk. The 1,000-year-old Ginkgo bilobas of this valley in China confirm that this miracle tree knows how to resist the ravages of time. Meanwhile, the Ginkgo biloba, which had disappeared from most continents, has had its revenge. Spotted in Japan by the German botanist Engelbert Kampfer at the end of the 17th century, and then brought to Europe, this species has once again conquered the planet. Like in Tokyo, these trees, with their unique foliage, are increasingly making an appearance on the sidewalks of New York. In the fall, the golden foliage of the ginkgo brightens the main streets of the largest capitals in the world. Its leaves are shaped like a bilobed fan. The tree can attain 30 to 40 meters in height and a circumference of more than 4 meters. Its beauty, its strength, its majesty have contributed to the reputation of the Ginkgo biloba. All that remains is to confirm whether its unusual physiological capacity justifies its reputation for extreme resistance. The opportunity presents itself near Tokyo. Damaged by a traffic accident, this tree will be sacrificed. A stroke of luck for David John Bellis, a young researcher at the National Institute for Environmental Studies in Tsukuba. The samples that he takes from the bark and the trunk will enable him to study how the tree resists intense exposure to pollution. The annual rings of the tree trunk will show the traumas suffered in the past. Kenichi Satake, the director of research on the environment and pollution, has discovered an effective means to determine the resistance of the trees according to the rate of pollution in a given area. The principle is simple. The molecules imprisoned in the tree's growth nodes, which are located under the bark, must be analyzed.
This bark pocket located outside of the tree in the past times, but now located inside the tree. And also there is a annual rings here. You can know when this bark pocket located at the outside. So if we analyze the tree bark pocket, we can know the history of pollution.
The trunk is initially sliced into sections. Then he takes samples of the pollution residue and subjects them to very high temperatures.
We analyzed the bark pocket in a ginkgo tree collected from Tokyo, which shows pollution in Tokyo increased after 1975. Ginkgo tree accumulates air pollution at the roadsides.
When subjected to a molecule screening device and a spectrograph, the substance extracted from the ginkgo's trunk reveals that the tree is able to survive in a highly polluted environment without even getting sick. So there is indeed something that makes ginkgo the superhero of trees. Obscure superstition is not the only reason it is venerated in China. For almost 3,000 years, traditional medicine has proven the ginkgo contains active ingredients that increase resistance to diseases. Master Tang, superior monk at the Tianxi Monastery, is filled with admiration for this tree and is familiar with its virtues.
Our ginkgo was planted by Master Zhang 2,000 years ago, near the end of the Han Dynasty. It is still extremely robust and very strong. The ginkgo is the most resistant of trees.
The monk keeps a copy of Cheng Nung Pen Sao, the oldest book of Chinese medicine. He describes the ginkgo's virtues.
We make tea with its leaves. When taken over a long period, it enhances all the bodily functions and the immune system. It can cure colds, influenza, etc. Its benefits are not limited to only one area. Ginkgo works well for many diseases, and it regulates bodily functions.
The Chinese pharmacopoeia uses and mixes only natural products. The Pen Sao Kang Mu, an extensive herbarium published in the 16th century, lists 1,900 drug formulas and approximately 5,000 basic ingredients, 90% of which consist of herbal extracts, and the remainder of minerals and animal parts. Shell ginkgo seeds are prescribed for asthma, coughs, and urinary disorders. The region of Sabue in Japan is the largest producer of ginkgo seeds in the world. The gatherers wear gloves because the pulp of what is called the silver apricot contains irritating substances and allergens. The fruit is thrown into a grinder, which separates the pulp and the kernels. Then the kernels are spread out on long tarps to dry in the sun. Each autumn, at the end of harvest, the residents of Sabue celebrate the ginkgo and its kernels. When consumed raw, the kernels are toxic. They are therefore boiled or roasted, and the taste is comparable to that of the sweet chestnut. This invaluable food product, which emperors of old accepted as a tribute, constitutes one of the traditional gifts at wedding ceremonies. In Shanghai, the sprawling metropolis where traditional and contemporary culture engage in a daily battle, Western medicine remains at the periphery. And Mrs. Dai Jingwu, like her fellow citizens, remains faithful to Chinese traditional medicine. Although she seems healthy, this elderly woman suffers from palpitations and shortness of breath. To make his diagnosis, Dr. Ding Yi questions his patient and then takes 3 different pulses. The first indicates the quality of her breathing, the second, the state of her upper abdomen, and the last, that of her lower abdomen.
We've always used ginkgo to cure diseases of the respiratory system, such as asthma and coughs. For some time now, we've also been making use of the benefits of the leaves. These contain elements that can increase blood circulation.
In the adjoining pharmacy, precise and age-old techniques are carried out. A dozen or so ingredients are added to the ginkgo nuts to make an infusion that the patient must drink upon awakening in the morning. Traditional medicine has formalized results obtained by pragmatic methods, and the active ingredients of substances used are often unknown. The first to have identified the ginkgo leaves' protective properties were the peasants. They noticed that parasites and insects did not attack the ginkgos as often as other trees. They concluded that some element must be acting as a repellent, an active ingredient with insecticidal qualities. From father to son, these peasants passed on a recipe for insecticide using ginkgo leaves. Today, we know the name of this active ingredient, ginkgolic acid. When great quantities of leaves are plunged into boiling water, they release this acid, which repels vermin from the harvests. This very concentrated decoction is then filtered. A toxic insect repellent. It is inexpensive and does not pollute. Its only disadvantage is also a benefit. Its potency is short-lived, which makes it necessary to spray often. But as a natural substance, it is more respectful to the environment. The question asked by Western science today is, if the ginkgo is able to protect itself against pollution, insects, aging, and survive any assault, could some of the properties that appear to make it indestructible be of use to humans as well?
The Ginkgo biloba extract, EGB, contains two types of active ingredients, flavonoids and terpenes. Discoveries and studies over the last 30 years have shown that the effects of these active ingredients are different, but complementary and often synergistic.
The first virtue of the ginkgo identified by science was its ability to regulate blood circulation. Ginkgo extract opens the arteries when they are clogged or narrowed, and tightens them when they are overly dilated. Depending on the state of the blood system, it can act either as a vasodilator or as a vasoconstrictor. One of the largest ginkgo plantations in the world can be found about 100 kilometers from Shanghai. Every year, a battalion of gatherers as effective as an army of grasshoppers descends upon the shrubs. The operation takes place at the end of summer, when the leaves are still green. Thousands of young plants are completely stripped in order to meet the increasing demand of the pharmaceutical industry. Because until now, no chemist has managed to synthetically reproduce the precious molecules found in these leaves. Several tons of bundles will be sent to treatment plants in Europe and China. For the Chinese, pharmacopoeia is also being industrialized. From now on, the ginkgo extract produced in these tanks will be taken in tablet and pill form. Chinese researchers like Dr. Tang are now aware of the potential of EGB and hope to take advantage of it.
Generally speaking, ginkgo can cure problems related to blood circulation. We have begun using it to treat vascular, coronary, and cerebral ailments. In addition, our company intends to develop drugs to fight economy class syndrome.
This syndrome, consisting of thrombosis and slowing of the blood circulation, affects long-distance passengers who must remain sitting in narrow airplane seats for many hours. Under these conditions, clots may form in the legs, and these could travel through the blood system and block the pulmonary arteries. Many cerebral disorders are related to a failure of blood flow. However, in the brain, the blood does not travel via veins or arteries, but through capillary vessels. Researchers thought of trying to extend the application of ginkgo to the treatment of certain cerebral dysfunctions. Bridget Spinwin, for example, decreased the blood flow to the brain of a rat, which is called ischemia.
A rat that has undergone a cerebral ischemia by occlusion of the middle cerebral artery has various behavioral problems. For example, when we hold it by the tail, we observe a rotation of the thorax typical of this kind of impairment. In addition, when we try to make it turn around, it turns only to one side and refuses to turn to the other. And using the tilted board test where a normal rat finds its balance, this one slips. After 14 days of EGB treatments, we noted a significant improvement of the disorders observed during the ischemia. Then, 48 hours after ischemia, the brains of the animals were removed and an average of 6 cross-sections were taken from each of them. The red-colored zone corresponds to the healthy hemisphere, or the one that is still viable. And the white area is the necrotic zone. These are the 6 cross-sections from the brain of the control animal, which was treated with water. And these are the 6 cross-sections of an animal treated with Ginkgo biloba extract. As you can see, the white necrotic zones are clearly smaller compared to those of the control animals.
The scientists were interested in 2 molecules found within the ginkgo cells, flavonoids and terpenes. And what they discovered astounded them. We must bear in mind that our cells are made of atoms, electrons revolving around a nucleus. Sometimes a lone electron, released from a magnetic force, is torn away from the nucleus. These particles, free radicals, depart in search of other electrons with which to bond. And in their destructive path, they damage or destroy nearby cells.
It is known today that free radicals are involved in a large number of pathologies. Aging is, of course, one example, but so are many degenerative and neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, and many other rheumatological and vascular phenomena.
While studying the flavonoids and the terpenes contained in the ginkgo, it was discovered that to some extent, they were able to trap the free radicals. In other words, they slowed down the process of entropy, which for every living organism eventually leads to death. This finally explains the incredible resistance of the ginkgo, the stubborn survivor. What Western research discovered, the Asian tradition had already suspected. The example of the ginkgo has proven that Eastern empiricism can inspire modern science. and help it to explore new therapeutic avenues. The new morning sun rises over the lanes of Shanghai's old district. Soon, these old houses will fall into ruin, just as day after day, the cells in our bodies are also inevitably ruined. Mrs. Daijing Wu says she is still experiencing some palpitations, but the ginkgo seed infusion she continues to take have improved her breathing. There is so much to learn from folklore, provided that we are able to decipher it. We might have understood the ginkgo's secrets earlier had we lent a more attentive ear to the legends and beliefs surrounding the power of the miracle tree. They should have perhaps been taken literally. Indeed, let us listen carefully to what follows. A monk will speak to us. He is about to explain in what ways the Ginkgo biloba protects humans. While we listen to him, let us replace the words negative vibrations with free radicals. His words will immediately take on a different meaning.
The temple is a place where people pray. They come here to express various wishes, some good and some bad. These negative vibrations always end up exploding. Here we believe that the ginkgo collects and absorbs all of these energies, that it is nourished by them, and thus grows larger and larger.
At the Senda Primary School in Hiroshima, one of the teachers, Kazuhiko Hanamoto, relates the tragedy of the past to the astounded children. He says this tree standing at the back of the building is a survivor of the bomb. You can see it in these photographs. The main trunk suffered greatly. A scar runs from top to bottom, but it continues to live. For the teacher, this ginkgo still standing in the middle of the rebuilt school is not only a witness to the past, but a symbol of hope. A little further away, on the school grounds, stands another surviving ginkgo. It is contemplated by the children who are intimidated, perplexed, and a little awestruck. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, somewhere on Shanghai's largest avenue, bordering the Hangpu River. These men and women knew the Middle Empire and saw it crumble. Some of them were born when the Dowager Empress Cixi still lived in the Forbidden City. In this country of centenarians and ginkgo bilobas, people have made a pact with the miracle tree and know how to use its recipes for survival. Mrs. Daijing is only 83 years old. Today, people in the Western world who, in the declining years of their lives, are suffering from neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, are turning to this tree. The tree that on a day filled with fire, death, and darkness defied the bomb of Hiroshima.